Hello and welcome to the Mindful Men podcast, a show helping men to open up about manhood. My name is Simon Rennie and my aim is to get men talking. From mental health to fatherhood and everything in between, Mindful Men creates a safe space for conversation. Now, before we get into this episode, I want to say a huge thank you for joining me. It means a world for you to join me and talk about men's issues. And if you love what you hear, please subscribe and share the episode with your mates. You can also join the conversation on Instagram and YouTube, and I'd love to connect with you there. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's get mindful. G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rennie, and today we're getting mindful about fatherhood, about coaching, about being a tradie, and podcasting as well. And today I've got Aaron Huey. How you going, Aaron?
Good, brother. Thank you very much for having me on. Good morning.
Thank you very much for coming on. Really enjoyed the stuff that you've been posting on your Instagram and even listening to your podcast as well. So it's great to talk to another bloke who's talking in this mental health space and opening doors for men to get vulnerable and so forth. So I really do appreciate your work, mate.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's definitely something it's very needed. There's a lot of people doing it, so it's nice to see that there is other people out there. But I think we're definitely a long way from where we need to be. But I guess you got to start somewhere.
You do. That's right. So I'd like to start off all my episodes with throwing it over to you to tell us a bit about who you are and how you come to be where you are today, a bit about family, maybe where you grew up and school or what you did after school.
Yeah, no problem. So as you can hear from the accent, I'm not from these parts. I live in Sydney now, but this wasn't home. I've been here for 12 years, but I originally from north of the hemisphere. It's kind of a hard one to say where because I was actually born in Germany. My mum and dad are both from Northern Ireland, but my dad was in the British military. So he was posted to Germany, and that's where I was born. So I grew up about 9 years of my life in Germany, grew up there. And then we moved to England. My dad got posted back to the UK. So we moved to Newcastle in England. And then when I was about 10, my mum and dad split up, and my mum, she couldn't take us back home to Northern Ireland because of all of the troubles and stuff over there with everything that goes on and, being British military kids. And I didn't always have this Scottish accent. I actually used to have a really English accent. I kind of sounded like Oliver Twist. So when I listened back to old footage of me, this little blonde kid, running around, people are like, that's not you. Like, yeah, that was a past life. So, we could go back to Northern Ireland, really. My mum didn't want to have to deal with all that hassle. So we moved up to Scotland. We had friends who lived up there. So, I kind of started my high school in Scotland, lived there. And then for some reason, I wanted to be a tradie. I don't know why. I always wanted to be a carpenter. So I left school early. I had no interest in being at school, nothing, didn't want to go to uni, didn't want to do any of that. I was like, no, I want to get a trade. So I left when I was 16, got a trade as a carpenter, and kind of just went from working in a workshop to then doing some kind of shop fitting to, had thoughts of running my own business at one point. And then I started working with my boss back home, and I just saw the things that he gave up, like family time, chasing money, and I kind of, that was the first kind of took the shine off it for me, running a business in construction anyway. I was like, no, I'll just stick to doing what I do and let someone else have to deal with that. Growing up in Scotland, it was kind of, I grew up in an area where it was kind of a rough area. A lot of drugs, alcohol, violence. So it's kind of never really somewhere I wanted to stay, to be honest. I always, from about the age of 14, I always wanted to come to Australia. I think it was growing up watching Neighbours and Home and Away. It kind of got me addicted, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I like the look of that. Sun, sand, beach. I could do that."
We had the last episode of Neighbours last night ever.
I actually probably haven't watched Neighbours in about 20 years. Actually, my girlfriend, she was watching it, and I was like, "Oh, I better make," because when we lived in Germany, British Broadcasting Television literally had one channel.
Mhm.
And I remember my mum religiously watching Home and Away and Neighbours. It was like the two staple soap operas that you would watch. So I literally grown up watching it. So I haven't seen, or I don't know any of the new characters, but it was really weird to see some of the old characters now.
Yep.
And like, it was like a blast from the past. It was like, this is kind of that. It was weird because I was like, this is one of the reasons why I actually wanted to come to Australia in the first place, was
Mhm.
growing up watching like, Ramsay Street and like the Home and Away. So yeah, it was kind of like, it didn't dawn on me until yesterday when I heard like people talking about it. Like, it's like, yeah, that's pretty much the reason why I'm here. One of the reasons.
So growing up, like Germany and then Scotland and so forth, like, and I want to hear a bit more about this Northern Ireland thing. So, like, for people that aren't familiar with what's happening over in Northern Ireland, in Ireland, like, tell us a bit about why you didn't really want to settle there, or your mum didn't want to settle there.
Yeah, so the troubles in Northern Ireland are pretty much between religion based, so between Catholics and Protestants, and it's been going for years. But like in the like 70s, 80s, and 90s, there's a lot of more bombings, shootings.
Mhm.
People just I don't know if you know about the Omaha bombing, like where they blew up a shopping center,
Yeah.
and it's pretty toxic. So I used to go home with my dad so my dad was Protestant, my
Mhm.
mum is Catholic. So it's kind of a no straight away. But then my dad was a British soldier. So it's kind of like a Romeo and Juliet on steroids. It's like an
Yeah.
extreme to the like what you don't do. So they were lucky enough, when my dad joined, that he got posted out straight away. So from like 1920, my mum and dad got taken away from that.
Mhm.
But when we would ever go home, like my dad would have to go and like check into the local camp and like tell them where he was going, what he was doing, because it's like a security risk having a British soldier kind of. And there were
Mhm.
certain areas that he couldn't come with us when we went with my mum. So if we'd go and visit some of my mum's family, my dad couldn't come. And we'd go and do things with my dad's family. It'd be like orange marches, which is like a huge celebration of, like you've probably seen them on the TV, where they have these massive pipe band marches for the Protestants, and then like
Mm.
the Catholics will throw petrol bombs at them. And there's certain streets that they can go down, and it's really, they're so stuck in their ways. Like it's still ongoing now. Like you go back to Northern Ireland and you think that you've been put back to 1980. Like it's still so stuck.
Yeah.
So for me to have like the British accent going back to that, my mum was just like, that's not what I want to do. Like having to explain who you are, you have to be careful to tell people who your dad is, and it's just, yeah. And I have family members who are in both sides of it. Like you go home and like some of the streets are painted um blue, white, and red for the Protestant side, and other sides are painted green, white, and orange. And it's like, and it even rolls over to the football. So like Glasgow and Celtic, which I could never really understand because they're Scottish teams, but they
Mhm.
take on the kind of Catholic and Protestant persona. You'll have guys who work together; they're best mates Monday to Friday, but on a Saturday, if Celtic and Rangers play, they'll be at two other ends of the bar, be hurling abuse at each other, even to the point where guys will, the football violence side of things, guys will, people have been stabbed at the end of a football match just because of they support the other team.
Just can't believe it. Like, I often reflect on where we are in today in like 2022 Australia, like not taking away from, I guess, our history, our colonized history, the troubles that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities here have had with white colonization
Yeah.
and so forth over the last 200 years or so, and that's intergenerational trauma still keeps going on today. But I often reflect on just today's society, and particularly where I live. I mean, we're in Sunshine Coast in Queensland. I've lived in South Australia, I've lived in the ACT and Tasmania as well, and I feel like, to a large extent, and this is not everybody, as I mentioned before, we're very lucky in Australia that we don't have this quite hostile type of environment in our communities. Sure, there's pockets of it, but not to the extent like what you're describing here. It sounds so far away. We're our own little island in the middle of the Southern Hemisphere, but for this to be happening, even probably today or whatever back home for you, like that just it's bewildering sometimes for an Australian to think like that, you know?
Yeah, it's I call it it's a caveman attitude. Like it's still like you have grown men who won't talk to somebody because they follow a different football team, or
Mm.
you have, like I think they were arguing about what flag they were flying over, and I know that's something that I've just seen here. They've got the Aboriginal flag flying over the bridge here in Sydney.
Mhm.
For me coming here and knowing the history, I'm like, well, that should have been, like, why hasn't that been? There's no reason why you can't have both.
Yeah.
And it's the same for me back home. Like, why don't you just fly both flags? But it's like, no, the Irish are like the colonization of the British coming over and taking Northern Ireland. We want Northern Ireland back. And then the Brits are like, well, no, this is our, and it's just like in this day and age, like you say, it seems just barbaric, but it's still rife. There's still people who will bring up their kids and make them follow a certain football team, and they won't let them wear like different colors. And I get supporting football teams and the rivalry, but in Scotland and Ireland, it goes to that extreme where violence is part of it, and even in England, like the football violence, and that's something that I kind of grew up in and around as well, like grown men meeting at football parks just to punch on with each other, not actually going to the game. Like a lot of the older men I grew up with, that's what they did at the weekend. And I think it kind of died down it was huge in the 80s,
Mhm.
died down in the 90s when like the rave culture come in and the drug culture come in, and then it's come back again. So you've got like groups of young men all meeting up, just punch on at train stations or meeting at the games, and it's kind of like it's a bit of a rites of passage over there. Like it's and I can understand why it looks kind of appealing to some young guys, running
Mhm.
with a group like a pack of boys and punching on, and it's a bit of a kind of macho as Mike, and I can get it. But when you've got grown men who are like 50, who've got day jobs, and that's the only thing that they look forward to, I'm like, yeah, this is not where I wanted to ever be. So yeah, like you said, the small pockets of that here, and kind of like especially here in Sydney, like you go to Western Sydney, it reminds me a lot of the area that I grew up in.
Mhm.
Low socioeconomic, families kind of without fathers, young men kind of lost, drugs, violence. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
nice to know that it's not as rife here in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah. So for someone who's moved around a lot, you mentioned your dad was in the British Army. You're born in Germany, Scotland, Ireland, now Australia. Like, where's home for you? Like where do you see as home being?
So yeah, a lot of people ask me that question, and I never really had one. Like I would know, like I would say, like my mum has been away from Ireland for probably 30 plus years, and she still calls Ireland home.
Mhm.
That's where she grew up. That's where like her family are. And I would Scotland is where I grew up, where my family is, but I wouldn't so much. I love Scotland. I love visiting it, but it's not a place I ever want to go back to and actually live and stay. So
Mhm.
for now, I would say Australia is home, but that may change. Like wherever, like I have 3 young daughters, like and they're my pretty much wherever they are is going to be my home.
Yeah.
But I'm not opposed to actually moving again. Like I'd love to be up where you are in the Sunshine Coast. Like
Yeah.
that's the end goal. Like, and it has been for a while to move out of Sydney and move north of the border. And thankfully my ex-wife is she's still keen on that as well.
Mhm.
So like whenever the time comes that we're all can move as kind of 2 separate families, it's still a dream to have. So wherever my girls will be right now is home, but for the most part, I have that moving, traveling in my blood. Like I wouldn't think anything of picking up and packing up and moving on to somewhere else now. So yeah, it's always something I've contemplated, but I guess as old saying is home is where you lay your hat. And for me, it's
Mm.
where my girls will be right now.
And moving around so much as when you were young, like did you ever did it ever challenge who you are as a person, your identity and how you saw yourself or how you thought about yourself?
It kind of It kind of did. I always reflect on it, and I moved when I was in Germany. I went to three different schools, and then when I was in Newcastle, I went to two different schools, and it's kind of weird because each one I went to, in one of them, I was either really popular and part of kind of like the in crowd, and then the next one I was kind of bullied and set aside, and that kind of went on. Like, one school I was like friends with everyone, and then the next school was kind of set aside, and then the next school was popular, and then it was up and down. It was really strange. Like I can meet people, make friends pretty easy. Like obviously moving around, you kind of, you get used to making friends and moving on, But yeah, growing up, I was always conscious that, why in one place am I like getting bullied and pushed aside? And then the next place I'm like, huge group of friends, like, really popular, outgoing. And then thankfully the last place at high school was kind of a mixture of both. And I think that's kind of, as you get older, you realize that, you're not going to be friends with everybody, and you don't need to be, but then you've got your certain group of friends who, they look up to you, and, so yeah, it was a strange one growing up. Like that's something I always think about.
Yeah, and thinking now that you're a dad, like growing up and moving around a lot, and you mentioned that you'd love to come over the border and live up here on the sunny coast and so forth. Like, how does that impact you as a dad now?
Not consciously, but it's been passed on somehow. But my girls are the same. They can go to a park and they can meet somebody within 2 minutes, and they're like, "Oh, Daddy, this is our friend such and such." Like my three girls are really, really friendly. They'll meet people, and and people will say to me, they're like, "Oh, your girls are really polite there," and that's no, it's only ever been me and their mum here, and like she's from Scotland as well. We moved here 12 years ago, and we don't have any family here. All our family still live back over. So I'm like, it's quite proud that both of us have been able to instill that in our girls. Just the politeness, the friendliness, yeah, we're very conscious on how we have taught our kids. We're aware of how we were brought up, and we didn't want it to be the same. We see the pitfalls that our parents did, and that generation of how they were brought their kids up. And I always thought I would bring mine up the same way until you become a parent and you see like, no, that's completely wrong. And like, smacking your kids. I used to being brought up in a military household. It was very disciplinarian, and like you will do as you're told, you will respect. And that's kind of how I started to parent my kids. And then I was like, the more and more I did work on myself, the more and more I looked into like conscious parenting, and I was a bit like, okay, maybe you need to rule in by having your kids scared of you and bowing down to your every need is not the way. And that was one of the biggest changes for me, was being like, okay, that's how I was brought up. And the whole saying, oh, that's how I was brought up, there's nothing wrong with me. And I'm like, maybe that's not the case.
Yeah, you've touched on something there that I often reflect on is men's culture and how we are today as blokes. And I grew up in the 90s as well in northern suburbs of Adelaide, very working class. 4 boys in our household plus dad. And it was, boys don't cry, boys are masculine, boys don't show emotion. We don't talk about that type of stuff as well. And I think a lot of that kind of comes from who our parents are. And then when we become dads, we kind of have this ingrained feelings and emotions or even thoughts about what parenting should look like because that's how we were grown up. But I love how you talk about conscious parenting there is the fact that we now have a child in front of us. So we go into automatic mode. Okay, this is what happened to me. This is what I'm meant to do now. But then we realize, no, it's, we're in 2022 or whatever year it is in the last few years, things don't have to be the same. Things can be challenged. Mental health, we can talk about it now. Boys can talk about it. Boys can cry. Boys can show emotion. Dads can not smack, or timeout is very different. Discipline and all that type of stuff. So I love how you're tuning into it because it's something that a lot of dads do, and a lot of dads probably feel a lot of shame as well of maybe doing that first smack. I did. I remember smacking my son once, and I thought, and as soon as it happened, I'm like, wow, this is not what I want to be. This is not the kind of parent that I want to be. yeah, I got smacked when I was a kid, but I don't want that for him. So, and it brought a lot of shame and guilt and like really felt bad afterwards. But I think the more that we can, I guess, challenge the thoughts and ideas that we were brought up with, and move forward and reflect on them and move forward, I think it's a great way for parenting in the future, and also supporting our kids growing up in their generations as well to make this change. And I think hats off to you that you're recognizing it and you wanted to do something about it.
Yeah, it took, our first daughter, I'd kind of, I would smack her and her mum would challenge me, and we'd always get into arguments about it. And like she was the same, she was brought with her dad, like smacking her. And yeah, I don't know I never felt guilty about doing it, but just the more and more it happened, and like when you see this tiny small child like kind of whimpering away from you, um and then you reflect on it, and I'm like, yeah, no, this doesn't, I don't
Mm.
know, this doesn't feel right. Like, I just don't want, there has to be other ways. Like, and for me, when she was younger was kind of when my mental health started to slip. And like I lost a best friend back home, and that was really trying for me. That's when my mental health kind of went really downhill. So like I was taking a lot of frustration out on her and her mum, just being angry, just being, frustrated, just being like a volcano all of the time.
Mhm.
And at the time, it was just, it happened. It was just, I had no control over it. But then, after it, on reflecting on it, I would always go back and apologize. And I was like, I don't want to be the dad who is hitting, then apologizing, hitting, then apologizing, angry, then apologizing. I was like, this isn't,
Mm.
it just didn't feel right. I'm like, just like, no, this has to change. So that's when we started looking at different ways to parent, and like how, I guess, the way I look at it, like I think our parents growing up were never told how to parent. They just followed suit. Like they
Mm.
probably didn't have the education. They probably didn't have the, the internet or books, or they just followed suit from how they were. Whereas we're different. Like we don't have a reason to keep following suit if it doesn't feel right. Like there's so much information, education out there, how to, parent as a single parent, or parent for boys, or parent for
Mhm.
girls, and you don't have to follow everything, but you can certainly challenge the beliefs that you were brought up with. And if they don't fit right for you, then it's up to you to educate yourself and be like, well, such and such have done this, and this is
Mhm.
how their kids have turned out, or scientists are saying like this, or it's just, I think we have more room for different options now, more different education than probably what our parents' generation ever had.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that emotionality, like say you pick and choose the different bits of the literature or resources that you check out. And it could also be, what your mates are doing or your extended family are doing as well. Like that works and is different as well. So you don't certainly have to follow everything to the T. Just find what works as well.
Yeah, and it's, as any parent knows, one day can be different to the other. You can do something one
Yeah.
day, and it's like you've got the kids from The Sound of Music, everything's beautiful, and you go out the door, and it's like, where did these devil kids come from? Like, who are these? Who are these kids? These aren't my kids. And with my three girls, it's the same. It's like a lottery in the morning, like getting them ready for school. Like either three of them can get up and they're all harmonious little angels, or one of them can get up and she just got up on the wrong side of the bed.
Hmm.
And I can get up on the wrong side of the bed, and my mindset can be different. I can just want to get the kids out and get gone, or I can want to spend time with them in the morning. And it's being mindful of that for both ourselves and for the kids. Like the one thing that I remember reading, and I think it was a conscious parenting book. It was like their little minds, like between 0 and 7, are malleable. Like they
Hmm.
don't really know what they're doing. They're learning. And even from 7 to 13, 14, 15, they're still the same. They're still making choices. So it's like it's unfair of you to try and discipline them on something every single day when they may do something bad one day because they're just testing you just to see. They're not really, especially my 2-year-old, like they hit that terrible twos, and I've seen it with all three of my girls. They've been absolute angels till 2. And then as soon as that 2 come, it's like okay, somebody come and get their kid. Who is this? And it's literally just happened again with our youngest. Like I texted mum a couple of weeks ago. I said, it's happening. And she was like, what do you mean it's happening? I was like, the twos. She's like, nah, not with Georgie. I'm like, oh yes, it's happening. And then the next week, because they're with me a week and then they're with their mum a week. And she was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like little one standing, throwing toast around, and I don't want this. And like she went from being this cute little cuddly loving angel to just this little devil child.
Yeah.
And for me, it was learning that that's what kids are. And you just have to not take it to heart that they don't want to eat their toast or they don't want to put a shoe on. It's just, that's how they're feeling that day. They don't really have any control over their emotions, whereas you do. Like you have the control. And it's, some days are better than others. Some days I have to stop, breathe, and be like, okay, you're the adult. It's only a shoe. She might want to put it on 3 or 4 times, but it's only a shoe.
I often reflect, like, when I became a dad, like all of a sudden, a lot of things that my mum and dad would say to me, all of a sudden made sense.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Like, oh, okay. Now I know why you were getting frustrated about that or saying that. And yeah. But like every child's different as well. So we've got 2, we've got a boy and a girl, and very different in the temperaments as well, and how they respond and how they show love and learn and all sorts of things. So, I mean, parenting is hard. But it's also one of the most joyous things to do in our
100%.
lives, I believe. What's fatherhood mean to you?
Fatherhood for me is I often say I've been called many things, but father or daddy is my favorite one. I'm a coach, I'm a tradie, podcaster, friend, but it's my favorite thing in the world. I've always wanted to be a father, always. From a young age, I've always known that I wanted to be a dad. I always wanted a boy. I never got there. And I think I probably resigned myself to just getting a boy dog, because I don't want to go back to those sleepless nights. I'm happy with my 3 girls. But yeah, for me, fatherhood is one of the greatest gifts you can be given. To have these 3 little blonde girls who look up to me, rely on me, love me, hate me some days is it's literally the best thing in the world. Like I couldn't ask for anything other than being a dad.
And how old are your girls?
9, 6, and 2.
Yeah. So we got a 2.5 and a 5.5 at the moment. So you're starting to come out of those aside from the 2-year-old, maybe you're well past those restless nights, but I always like to keep us on our toes. So
yeah. No, the 2-year-old, she likes to spend half the night with daddy in daddy's bed, so that's a challenge that I'm gonna try and overcome with her. But no, for the most part, the oldest 2 they go to bed when they're supposed to. And but yeah, that's kind of the stuff that I don't want to go back to. Like, as much as I would love to have a boy, those sleepless nights, waking up at 12, then 2, then 4 for feeds, I'm just like, yeah, no, I'm just
done.
I'll maybe just wait until I become a granddad and hope that one of the girls give me a son that way. So
yeah. So you mentioned before experiencing a bit of mental health issues when your mate passed away. Without going into details about what happened to him or her, is it a guy? I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's a guy, my best friend. Yeah.
About the exact things, but like, can you tell us a bit about this time and what were some of the things that you were experiencing personally?
Yeah, so it all came out of the blue. I'm happy to share his story. It was so it was a friend back home in Scotland, and it was the weekend of the Manny Pacquiao and Mayweather fight back in 2015, I think it was. So it's actually really strange because it was the weekend of my daughter's 2nd birthday, Millie, our eldest. And we actually found out that morning that we were pregnant with our middle one. So, this was a Sunday morning. We woke up to a positive pregnancy test. We had a birthday party for our daughter. Me and a couple of friends after the party went and watched the fight, went to bed. That was a Sunday night, and then woke up Monday morning, and I had a couple of missed calls from people back home. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Why are people calling me? Like my mum, my sister. And I thought, no, actually, it was my sister and a friend. And initially I thought something's happened to my mum because her health is bad. And I was like, oh, I'll call them. Like it was like 5:30 on Monday morning. I was like, I'll call them when I kind of get on my way to work. And I remember getting up and, as you do, look at your phone, look at social media. And straight away, the very first post was my mate's brother-in-law posting, asking for information about the death of my friend at the hands of the police. And did anybody see anything? And I was kind of like, did I read that right? And then it kind of all just kind of cut the click from there. Like I called my little sister and she was in tears. She couldn't speak. She was like, my best friend was called Sheku. She was like, Shek's gone. And I was like, what, how? And I kind of read the posts and yeah, he'd been in an altercation with the police.
Mm-hmm.
9 officers came out of nowhere, pinned him to the ground, tased him, handcuffed him, like roughed him up. And within like 90 seconds, he was gone. He was dead, out. And then they tried to cover it all up.
Yeah.
So that was the Monday morning. And then for about a week after that, it was just like, stories here, there, things in the paper, things in the press of like, trying to paint him in this bad light. And we actually forgot that we were pregnant. Like me and my wife at the time completely forgot because it just sent us into this spiral of just, grief, trying to find out what happened. And like, we forgot for a whole week that we had a little one coming. So this, yeah, it was completely out of the blue. It was quite horrific. And then all these, all these stories were coming back and forth. So like I'm on this side of the world trying to find out what, speaking to different people. And I think it was about a year before we got to go back to Scotland. So by this time, he'd been buried. There was still no one had an idea of really what happened at this point. Like, so for me, then it was almost like I just hadn't spoke to him for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple of weeks of like being upset, being, he's not there. And at the time he had a 2-year-old and a 15-week-old son. So the main thing that was playing in my mind then was like, they're never going to get to see their daddy. Like,
yeah,
just kept real. And so we had a 2-year-old, we had another one on the way. And for me, it was really close to home. And I was like, those kids are never going to see their dad. Then we went home the following year. And it wasn't until I was standing over his grave, it kind of hit me that he was gone. And then I came back to Australia, and then that's when everything went dark. Like my mental health just declined. At the time I was working as a kind of site foreman for a construction company. So I had the pressure of that. I had the pressure of a new baby. And yeah, I just went into a deep dark hole of, I'd never experienced depression or anxiety, but like I'd be on my way to work in the morning and like my back would be in bits because I was so tense and taut up, and like I was just frustrated. Like they used to call me the angry Scotsman on site because I would just shout at everyone and I would be really, just not a nice person. Like even my wife, like at the time, like we would just, and she said to me, she's like, you need to go and speak to somebody. Like what? And it took me a while, as typical men do. I was like, nah, I'll be all right. I'll be all right. And then I was like, nah, like I could see I'd come home and I would just be shouting at her. I'd be shouting at the little ones and I'd just be getting frustrated. And it took me about probably 6 months of just this. And I was like, okay, no, I do actually need to go and just tell somebody that like I just not loving life right now.
Yeah.
So I went to the doctor and put me on a mental health plan, and then I seen a psychologist for probably about 6-7 months, and it didn't say I was depressed, but they said it was grief, like major grief for obviously losing a friend, but it was prolonged, almost like delayed grief because it had been a year plus since he passed. So it was kind of me revisiting all of those old things, and I got put on medication, and it helped. It was almost like the brain fog that I was having. Like I couldn't think properly. I felt like I just had this constant cloud around the back of my head, where everything would just frustrate me. Everything was just annoying. Everything was just, I didn't want to do anything. I couldn't be bothered speaking to people. When I got the medication, that all lifted, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, cool. But not only with that, like it made me start to question things in my own life, like, what am I doing? Like, why am I working these hours away from the girls and their mom? And do I really want to be doing this for the rest of my life? Like here's my best friend who's 30 and his life's been taken away. Like I moved to another side of the world to start a new life for myself, but I've kind of just fell back into that work, live rut.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of got better. It was about a period of a year where, I was on the medication, was all good. And I kind of was like, I want to come off the medication. I didn't want to be on it forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I gradually came off it. Everything was fine. Had the little one, everything was going good. And then we actually had another friend pass away here. Kind of similar, kind of out of the blue circumstances. Friend passed away from anaphylaxis. Same thing, had 2 young kids, was really close to me and my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then it all kicked in again, like that grief, depression. And this time it was like double. Like I could feel it coming. And again, I went back on the medication, but it wasn't helping as good. So this is when I started down the kind of personal development world of like I was still conscious of wanting to do new things. So I was like, kind of started a couple of different online ventures to try and get away from working the 9 to 5 type job. And that kind of added a little bit more stress to me. I was doing these things that I was seeing these people who were becoming like millionaires overnight. And for me, it was like, why is this not working for me? What am I doing wrong? Why is this not happening? So I added all this extra stress to myself, which I see now. But at the time I was like, no, I'm doing what I need to do. I'm doing what's best for me and my family. And, working 12 hours a day and then coming home and trying to build this online business. And it just, so the second time around it got heavier and it got worse. And I was on medication for about a year, and stupidly decided to come off myself. I thought, no, I've learned all these mindfulness techniques, meditation, cold showers, breath work. I was doing all of these things that were helping me. And I was able to relieve myself of the anxieties. I could feel it coming on when I was on my way to work, and I would do a few, breath work techniques, a few mindful things, and it would alleviate. And I was like, okay, cool. This stuff works. I'll come off my medication. Wasn't a good idea. Like it ramped everything up, and even to, it started to affect my relationship. We weren't getting on. We weren't talking. Just didn't want to be around my wife. Like we argued constantly. And the kids would frustrate me. Just everything was like just wasn't in a happy spot. And then decided to go back on the medication, and that's kind of where things got a little bit better. And touch wood, ever since I haven't been in that. I have a few off days like we all do, but nowhere near as bad as it was over those times.
Wow. I've got so many questions.
Sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there.
No, it's good. Like, it's important to, and that's what I love about Mindful Men podcast, and then podcasts in general is giving the space for you, just for guests to talk about their stories, which is fantastic. But I want to take it back to when your mate passed away and you're on the other side of the world. Like, can you tell us a bit about those feelings? Like, it must have been incredibly frustrating not to be there in person and going through that, in person as opposed to being here.
Yeah, it was really hard because, as I say, the circumstances that he passed away, and there was a lot of marches back home for answers. There was a lot of, it went to court. There was so many things that were happening back home, and I was kind of watching them. It was almost like watching a movie because I was seeing it on social media. I was talking to friends, it was even on like the BBC and stuff. So I was like sat and watching a documentary of and I was actually in some of the pictures that they were showing. And it was almost like watching a movie.
Yeah.
And then I would make the mistake of like trying to find all of the articles and read things about him. And this is where my first inkling into how bad media is, and how just stop watching the news, stop reading newspapers after this, because they were painting him in this light of he was originally from Sierra Leone. So he was black man. And they were trying to paint him as a terrorist. And they were trying to paint him as this large black man was brandishing a knife and attacked the police. Now, if it had been any other person in our community, they would have got away with it. If it had been any other just normal young black man, they would have got away with it. But because of Sheck and who he was and the massive persona that he had and how much of a gentleman he was, everybody was like, nah, this doesn't seem right. He's never been in a fight in his life. He's the type of bloke who would be in the middle of the fight, splitting up. Like, this isn't. So there was all of that, like the media stuff, trying to paint him in this bad light. And then, as I say, for a year, it just felt like I hadn't spoke to him. Like, it just felt like we'd go a couple of months where we wouldn't speak to each other. Then one of us would pick up the phone or would text, and it would just straight back to that. It was just like I hadn't spoke to him for a while. So it kind of felt it felt like I was just watching it on a movie, but I had to stop myself from reading all these articles every time they came out, because I was literally lying in bed at night, just trawling through the internet, trying to read all of this stuff. And my wife at the time, she's like, you can't keep doing that. Like, we know him, we know who he is, we know all of this is just BS. So it was, I had to make this mindful decision of like blocking all this like media things on my phone and just stepping away from it all.
And fast forward it to that moment when you decided that you need to go see the doctor and get that mental health care plan. Like, that was one of for me, like, I did that 10 years ago. So it's 10 years now since I first went to see a doctor, and I've been living with OCD, depression, and anxiety since I was 8. So, a long time. And one of the hardest things for me to do was just say the words, I think I've got something, mental health issues or something like that. Do you remember, like, was it a hard thing for you to discuss with the doctor, or was it it just came out? Or
it actually wasn't. I didn't feel any shame around it. I didn't feel, for me, it just felt like it was something that I needed to do, like to better myself. I think because I was on that kind of just before I was on that path of personal development, I was like, I have a young family. I'm on the other side of the world. Like, this is just something that I need to do. And if it means, I need to be on medication to help me, I just wanted to stop the darkness and just wanted to stop like the pain that I was feeling like in my back because of the tension and the anxiety. And then like just my partner, she has had, like, my ex-partner, sorry, she has had bouts of depression on and off over the years while we've been together. So I'm well aware of the symptoms of depression and anxiety, and she's seen a few people and spoke to a few like psychologists back home and here. So like I was aware of it. Like, I knew, like, I could see all of my symptoms in her. So I could see all her symptoms in me. So I knew what I needed to do. But going to the doctor and having those conversations, it was kind of there was no shame, there was no guilt. I was just like, no, this is what I need to do to be who I need to be for me and my family.
And you've touched on a few things around, like, I always like to refer to it as the roller coaster ride of mental health, and you have these periods where, and for a lot of guys in particular, it could be a long period before they even get help, of trying to work it out themselves. Maybe it's getting on drugs, alcohol, whatever, trying to numb it themselves. Some people go to the gym for 6 hours a day trying to work it out of the system, and then it just keeps cycling through. And then you get help, and you might start feeling good again. You might be on medication, like you mentioned, get that brain fog away, and then you come off, and then you might have bad periods where things just aren't working, your brain fog's back. Maybe you've come off the medication, or maybe the medication is no longer working as effectively. So it's kind of like a roller coaster, because then you might find new medication, or you might go back on medication. Maybe it's the therapist that you've started seeing you weren't quite gelling with, and you find a new one, and you go through this roller coaster, and it can go for a long period of time, and it can come back out of the blue as well. You could be triggered by something like your other friend as well, who passed away, and then that came on worse. And but I guess the positive thing out of all this grief that you've experienced is that you're just willing to get the help, and that you recognize, I just need to get some help. I need to go talk to someone. I need to get some medications. And again, hats off to you, because a lot of guys find this hard to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of the major things for me in my journey in this, as well as, like, yourself, having a platform where I can open up about it and get other people in. My podcast, I spoke to an ex-Australian Special Forces soldier, and he was talking about his battles with BTST, and he came out of, he'd been to Afghanistan and a few other places, and he came out and same thing. His demons came through, and he went and got the help, and he's now a coach. He's a men's coach, and he's helping guys get through their stuff. So, but it was my podcast with him. I knew that my dad was going through that and had been for years, but trying to tell him little things to do and trying to share what I had found over the past 4 or 5 years through my own journey, but as well as I'd started coaching at the time, so I've some other techniques just to help. Wouldn't listen, was just no, I'll just keep it in this little box in my head, and that's good, it's good. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the worst thing to do, but I can't tell you that. So then as soon as I did this podcast with Mark, the SAS soldier, I was like, let me share this with my dad. I know, it's coming from me. This is coming from someone who's been in his world, who's experienced it. And I sent it to him literally within an hour. He's like, fuck, I have this. This guy, I need, I have what Mark's talking about. I was like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And he went and got help. He went and spoke to the UK equivalent to their forces help, and that was probably a year and a half ago. But he had struggled with this for the past 20 plus years. He's been out of the British Army for nearly 16, 17 years, but it has affected him since. And it was just hearing that one conversation of someone who was had been in his field, had been through it. And I was like, that's why I need to keep sharing what I'm doing. That's why I need to keep, it came easy for me to ask for help and open up and talk about my medication and, talk about my demons. But I know for a fact there's other men who just won't. And whether it's a generational thing, whether it's a pride thing, it's all bullshit. Put that all aside. And for me, I tell the guys that I work with and the guys that I speak to, it's for you and your family. You can hold it all in and you can be this tough guy and all of this, but it doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit you. In the long run, it doesn't benefit your family because they're not getting the best of you. But then they'll see you do that, and then that'll just continue. And then if they don't have it in themselves to say, nah, I don't want to do what my dad did. For me, I was lucky enough, kind of lucky enough, I guess, but I grew up with kind of anti-role models. So the men in my life at the time, I was like, I'm not going to do what they did. I'm not going to don't go down that path. And that's what I have done. But so many people don't have that. So many people oh, this is what my dad did. He drank himself. And it's it's like that phrase, you have the two sons who have an alcoholic father. One of them becomes a successful businessman. The other one becomes an alcoholic. And they say to them, why did you become a successful businessman? It's oh, because my dad was an alcoholic and I didn't want to do that. And then the other son's like, why did you become an alcoholic? Well, my dad was an alcoholic and that's all I know. It's so easy to fall into that.
Yeah, it sounds like a real powerful episode that you had. And you're a tradie. You come from a tradie background. You're a carpenter, I understand.
Yeah.
And teeing up this episode, I was on the Men's Line Australia website and having a look at some stats around men's suicide, but particularly in tradies, it's 3 times higher than for other men. And I would imagine, I've never been a tradie, but I can imagine what a tradie site would look like and sound like and feel like, a very masculine place to be.
100%,
what some of the experiences that you've seen, I guess, on sites, in terms of the way that guys manage their health and well-being, not just their mental health, but physical health is quite a taxing thing as well. And do they talk about things that are on their mind, or is it that kind of culture where they bottle it all up, like your dad, didn't want to hear it from, maybe there's a trader listening today who might go, oh, this is the episode that, prompts me to get help or something like that. What's it like on a site?
Yeah, it's definitely not the type of place where people will talk about their feelings. They won't talk about what they want, especially the older tradies. They're the ones that I find I'm having major issues with trying to get through. So it's definitely I don't want to say it's a toxic environment, because there's some awesome aspects to being a tradie, like the camaraderie shit. But when it comes to mental health, it's definitely not even just mental health, like physical health. Tradies are one of the only jobs where they get up and they use body for their work. Like that's something I'm trying to get across to a lot of guys. Like, they'll get up, 5-6 o'clock in the morning, they'll go out work 12-hour days. They'll come home and, if they don't have a family, they'll either, stick it up their nose or they'll piss against the wall. And like, especially the older, I've met so many single, divorced, older tradies who they'll just work as many hours as they're given because that's all that they know. And that's all that fills their time. But even from a physical aspect, like, yes, we have a physical job, but a lot of guys aren't fit. You'll see tradies like smashing tins of and pies first thing in the morning and then at lunchtime and then in the afternoon. Like, it's a physical job and we need to have sustenance in us. Yeah. But the diet that a tradie has is horrendous. Like your standard tradie, like and I have been there, like, stopping at the server on the way in the morning, grabbing a coffee and a donut, and that's breakfast. Like I did that for like a whole year one time, and like it just becomes habit. But I mean, there's a lot of, it's starting to become more acceptable now. Like, you have the mates in construction, you have like the Are You OK days, the Movember, and they're all awesome places. But when I looked, from my perspective, when I looked at it, all I can see in the trade industry is anti-suicide talks and anti-depression talks. And for me, that's not good enough. Like, we need to get to our guys 10 years before they even want to pick up a phone to say that they're having issues. We need to be promoting more personal development for them. Like, looking at all their aspects of their life, especially the single ones. Like the young guys, they take on what I'm telling them on site. Like, when I tell guys I'm a coach and they're like, oh, you're telling me how to live my life. And I'm like, well, no, what's not going right in your life? What do you want to change? That's where I come in to help. And it's funny, when you start having the conversations with the guys, they'll open up. Like the amount of people I say, like I even had one yesterday. It was a skip driver rocked up, 50-year-old skip driver, heavily tattooed, your typical tradie who you would think, yeah, nah, mate, should be right, And on the outset, to look at him, that's, he's a typical tradie. But as soon as we started talking about just general conversation, and I got into, I always try and wedge it into the conversation just to kind of gauge their reaction. He opened up about like his issues and the work that he'd done on himself. And to look at that guy, you wouldn't think that that'd be the type of thing that he would do. And that's the kind of what I want with my coaching, is to break that stigma that we'll tradies, we're all right, we'll get through it. Because it's not like, I have seen so many old men who hate their job. They come in, they hate their life every single day, but they'll do it for the next 10, 15 years because it's all that they know, and they don't see any other way out. And I'm like, if you would just change your mindset, if this is the only thing that you want to do, if this is the only thing that you've ever known, which I understand, like me, I've been a tradie since I was 16. I'm a one-finger wizard when it comes to using the laptop. So I couldn't work in an office. But I'm like, if we just change your mindset and, you're here, you've got a job that puts a roof over your head, it puts money in the bank, puts food on your table, find something else to do outside of work. Just use this solely as, this doesn't have to be your life. A lot of tradies, that's their identity. That's all that they know. I'm like, if we were to just, spend more time doing things for you, spend more time, stop working a Saturday, for instance. Don't take time off, like go to the footy, go and, surf, go and, take a dirt bike out, go and just do something. Don't come to work because it's the only thing you know. It's the only thing that, it keeps you busy. It takes your mind off those demons that you have. Like it's definitely going to be a hard slog. It's definitely a hard, my business coach said to me a few weeks ago, he's like, you picked probably the hardest coaching niche to get. You've got men who don't talk about their shit, and then you've got tradies. I'm like, yeah, pretty much.
But it's where, I guess, just on those stats around 3 times higher than other men to commit suicide, just shows in itself that it's a much needed niche to crack. And similar to your dad in that other episode with the SAS soldier, you've got that shared lived experience of being a tradie. So you're relatable to other tradies, which is again, another wonderful thing to be. So this kind of leads into your coaching business. And I'd love to explore this a little bit more if you've got a bit of time, is you've got a big Hustle to Happiness sign behind you.
Yeah.
And I think what you're just saying there talks to that. It's breaking free from that hustle of the being a tradie and finding happiness outside of work as well. Have I got that right, or is that completely wrong? Tell us
Yeah,
a bit
yeah,
about.
yeah. No, it's definitely so. The hustle to happiness, it comes from, like, happiness is not something that comes easy to a lot of people.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a daily, you've got to work on it. Like, you've got to train your mind to look at the positive side of things. So the hustle to happiness happiness is a work in progress.
Mhm.
Like you said, the roller coaster of the mental health. It's about knowing that, yeah, you're having a dark day. What's the flip side to it? Like, what can you do? Whether it's, coming from a place of gratitude, or having, some techniques, whether it's a breath work, or just stopping for a 10-minute meditation. I do like 3 times a day. Just stop, just take, no matter what's going on, just stop and just come back to myself. Like, and that's what the hustle is. It's people have this hustle mentality where you got to keep going, keep going, keep going.
Mm.
And I was there. Like, I started that. Like, I had the day job as a tradie, and then I was trying to do like an online entrepreneur with like different businesses, and that's where it came from. And I was like, this is just actually adding on to what, like, it's the stress that I don't need.
Yeah.
And I was like, happiness is what I'm after. Like, once somebody said to me, it's like, what is it you're chasing? Like, where's when you stop and think, what's one of your happy thoughts? And I didn't have any. It's like, fuck.
Yeah.
It's like, where's your happy place? It's like, at this time, I was like, I don't have one. Like, I can't think of anything that I have. And that's when it struck me. I was like, happiness is a hustle. Like, it's not something that's there all of the time.
Mm.
And it's about finding what works for you and changing, whether it be your mindset, or changing your environment, the people who are around you, yeah.
So how can like people, touch base? Like what can I expect from you from your coaching? Like what does a session look like, or what does a program look like? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I like to work with people for a year, one-on-one sessions. Like, I think a good 12 months, because it takes time. It takes about 6 months for people to fully appreciate the changes that they're making, but then
Mhm.
implement them. So, like, talking about trying to get to the root of what your beliefs are massive. Like, we can do all of the physical changes, we can do all of the meditations, you can do all of the looking at your environment. But if you don't believe that what you're doing is beneficial for you, or if you don't believe that you even deserve to have it, like a lot of tradies, they don't they don't really believe in themselves. Like, they don't hype themselves up in the morning. They don't, like, believe that they deserve it. So it's about finding the root cause of why they think that, getting a
Mhm.
better belief for themselves, but also like what they want from life. Like, tradies will go week to week, whether it's because that's what they get paid week to week. They won't think 6 months, 12 months, 5 years down the line. So for me, and this is only something I've found out over the past 2 or 3 years of coaching, like, planning for 5 years, planning for 7 years, like having that bigger picture to take you from the shit show that you're in right now. And like, this is where I'll be in 5 years. This is the plans
Yeah.
that I have. This is where I'm working towards, so that right now, yeah, it's shitty, but I know I have something bigger. So coaching with me is it's a 12-month plan to start with,
Mhm.
to, work out what do they want out of life, like, what is their happy place, where do they want their happy place to be, how we can get them to their, what is it we need to change in their life right now, what do we need to implement with them,
Mhm.
if they are having those dark thoughts, if they are having those demons, if they're feeling isolated. Okay, what do we need to do to get you in a space where that's gone? Or
Yeah.
at least, what tools can we give you to work on that
Yeah.
daily, so that you can get yourself 12 months down the line where you're in a better place, and you can look back and go, yeah, that's where I was, but now this is where I am, and I know where I'm going.
Yeah. And is it just for tradies, or can other people, touch base
All
with you?
I coach men and women,
Mhm.
for the exact same thing, but my focus is tradies, just because, one, it's close to my heart, and two, I know it's much needed.
Yep.
But I take on, I take on male and female clients. I've actually had quite a few female clients over the past 2 years. But yeah, I just know that our trades need, especially with what's happened over the past 2 years, and there's a lot of construction companies falling to the wayside now with everything that's happening. So there's going to be a lot more needed in this space. So that's why my main focus is trying to at least educate the trades that it doesn't have to be how it is right now.
Yeah, and how can people find you? Like the website or on the social?
Just social. So Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and it's just Aaron William Daniel Huey. I'm the only one. I haven't found another one yet. That's the joys of having like three first names. Or on Instagram, it's Coach to the Tradies. Same on LinkedIn. I have on LinkedIn, Hustle Talk Coaching is my coaching name.
Yep.
The website is kind of like yourself. It's a work in progress.
I know you're paid there. What I will do is I'll put the links to all those in the show notes so that people can just easily listen to the episode and also click on the link and get in touch with you if they want to. So, awesome. Aaron, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I could probably talk to you for hours. I've got so many more questions, but it is a Saturday morning and weekends away. But I'd like to leave over to you to plug something that makes you feel good. Something could be a resource or something you're watching on telly or the music that you're listening to, a podcast you're listening to, a book or anything like that. And it doesn't have to be anything we've been related to what we're talking about today, just something that makes you feel good that other people can maybe, tune into and feel good as well.
Yeah. So I listen to a lot of audibles, like when I drive to work. I'm like an hour driving, an hour at home. Radio, I actually took the radio out of my car a couple of years ago so that it would just solely be Audible. So I'm always listening to audibles or podcasts. A podcast actually that I've been listening to recently is called the Modern Wisdom Podcast. A guy called Chris Willex. Really, really good, insightful. So I'd recommend that Modern Wisdom podcast. I listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson stuff. I think for men and young guys, his wisdom in this day is awesome. But yeah, I just try and fill myself with as much knowledge as possible. Like I don't turn the TV off, turn the radio off, and just educate yourself. Audibles, podcasts. That's it's the only way we can grow and actually listen to the things that are beneficial for us.
Yeah, I love the audio versions of a lot of books and even the beauty about podcasts is you can put it in, you put your earphones in. You could do a day at work with one in your ear and stuff like that. You don't have to think about it. It's just once you find a good one, and you find a good episode with good guests, and it's just an easy listen to, and you learn so much, if not about the world, but about yourself as well.
I constantly have headphones in, like even at home, like at night, if the girls aren't here and my girlfriend's not here, I will have my headphones in while I'm cooking, cleaning. It's just, I just want to try and develop and kind of educate myself to be, I guess, the best version of yourself as you can, but also to even the conscious parenting one. Like nobody gives you the handbook as a parent, so that's that's probably another one that I would definitely recommend. If you're a father and you're kind of struggling with kids, find a conscious parent audible, because I got so much from that.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thanks, mate, for your time this morning. I really do appreciate your time on a Saturday morning, and I hope you've got some good stuff planned for the day or the weekend.
Get the girls tomorrow, so daddy daycare kicks in again. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on, Simon. I love the work that you're doing and all the other guests that you've had on. So keep it up, and I'd be more than happy to come back on again and answer the rest of the questions that you've got.
I'll book it in, mate. It's got so much more to ask. But yeah, thanks so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Appreciate it, brother. Same to you.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode, and I hope you got some value from it. If anything triggered your mental health today, please reach out to your support networks. Also, if you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your mates. For more from Mindful Men, you can check us out on Instagram and YouTube, and I'll throw the links to these pages in the show notes below. But until next time, stay mindful.